Hi, g'day scrappers. Just doing a little video on buying circuit boards here in Melbourne, Australia. As a lot of you might be aware, that I've been buying e-waste from scrappers probably for the last year and a half or so. And so I just wanted to do a bit of an update, give it a little bit of an idea on some of the boards that I grade, and also the prices and any other information that I can give scrappers that want to sell me their circuit boards based in Melbourne. Now if you're interstate, some things might be worth posting, but as you know, postage is very expensive, so it's not really worth posting me things like motherboards and that. It's more for the smaller components like IC chips that might be worth sending me. Some people send me RAM by post, ceramic CPUs by post, but generally I pretty much just buy from scrappers here in Melbourne. And the reason why I buy e-waste is I started buying because I've got a forum, scrap forum in Australia, and just found that a lot of people, local scrappers, just didn't have a place to sell their boards. And with old school scrappers dabbling into PCs and stuff and realizing that they can maximize their money by, you know, actually taking out the boards and getting better money than just say 10 cents a kilo as scrap steel. So yeah, so that was the reason why I started buying boards, is to give scrappers the opportunity to come and sell small quantities, because I send off large quantities to a bulk buyer. I have a private buyer that buys from me, so I'm already sending off cages of motherboards. So since I'm doing that, I thought, well, I might as well help the smaller scrappers that can't accumulate enough to sell to the big buyers, and they can come here and sell $50, $100 worth of boards, or well, there's no real limit, because the more boards you've got, there's no problem buying it, because my buyer will just sort of come in and take over the sale. Yeah, so anyway, so I thought I'd just go through the different grades of boards, that how I grade boards. Prices are a lot different here in Australia, obviously, because all the refiners are everywhere else in the world, so everything needs to be exported out. So that's why the prices are a little bit different here in Australia, but I don't really have a big markup on stuff like motherboards and all that. It's mostly just, since I'm already taking them there, I don't mind adding other boards to it. But anyway, so we'll just go through the list. Now, below this video, you'll see a link to my buy page on my forum, and you'll see all the things that I buy and the current prices. And so I update that list all the time. So if you want a fresh update, just click on that link below in the comments section, and or in the description, and that'll take you directly to the list of all my prices. But for now, we'll just go through the boards, and I'll just explain a few of the grades that might be a little bit confusing to people. But the reason why I thought I'd do this video is because a lot of scrappers, obviously, if you're a first-time scrapper, you're not really sure on what things to depopulate from a circuit board, and or how to present it to me. So hopefully I'll have all those bits of information in this video. All right, so let's start at the top of the list, and I'm just going to work my way down with pretty much most of the items that I've got on the list, just to give you a bit of a look. Okay, well, first up, straight off the top of the list, is low-grade boards. Now, what I mean by low-grade boards is basically mostly brown boards that don't have any IC chips on them, or any copper or anything like that. Tops of CRT boards. As you can see, there's no IC chips, and there's really nothing apart from base metal value here, and very light. So there's not much value. Other things like green boards like this, it's little pins but there's really nothing on it. And so you got the gold pins and that, but we don't value boards by their gold pins. So this is not even a mid-grade board or a power board. This is just basically a low-grade board, and I don't buy these. What I recommend you do is maybe just remove the gold pins and just throw the rest away. It's only fiberglass. Nothing boards like that. As you can see, there are stuff on it, but it's only base metal and there are no IC chips. So therefore it's not even a grade. It's just what we call low grade. Another one here, like LCD panel on a board. There's no, again, there is a little IC chip underneath there, but still that's not mid-grade, that's just low grade. I don't buy them because there's no real value. Another good example is a depopulated board. So this one here was a slot card, okay, and like the gold fingers have been removed, all the chips have been removed. This is now low grade, virtually nothing. Now sure, there is value. You can see gold flashing, and there'll be nickel and tin and probably even still silver and stuff, but that's not how people buy boards. If you had like tons of boards like this, I can find a buyer that will buy them based on what's left of the base metals, but really you might as well just get scrap steel price for them, like 10-12 cents a kilo. Just throw them straight into your scrap steel. Boards like that, it's got nothing on them. Another example, it's just got little ports, but there's no IC chips. Tactile switches, even if they're on green boards, there is no real buying value, so we don't buy this sort of stuff. Little ports like that. So all this is low grade, I don't buy. So anything like this, if you see anything of value, like say this board, there are a couple of IC chips. You're better off just to remove those IC chips and then just throw the rest in scrap steel. And obviously you take off a little bit of copper that you find and stuff like that. But generally I don't buy low grade boards. Right, so low grade boards, not buying. Okay. Next up are power boards. Now power boards, I currently pay 25 cents a kilo. Not much value on power boards, but basically any kind of little brown board like this that's got a transformer on it, bit of copper value, aluminium, that's what we call a power board. So from old TVs, LCD TVs, plasma TVs, where you see copper transformers, aluminium heat sinks, copper spools, boards like that, that's what we class as a power board. In some countries they class them different. Again, power board, like in America, some buyers will grade these as mid-grade. They only pay 25 cents a pound, but they call these mid-grade, these low-grade. Well, yep, these are low-grade, but even if they've got a couple of little chips on them, they're not mid-grade, they're definitely power boards. We just have a little bit of a different grading system here than in the States, and our mid-grade are actually circuit boards, and it goes on from there. Whereas in the States, the buyers will buy mid-grade as peripheral boards. Well, it's a little bit different here. But anyway, so that's your standard power board, and yeah, this is the lowest grade of board that I buy. The power board's 25 cents a kilo. Alright, so we've got the power boards and the low grade boards out the way. Now let's get on to the real stuff. Okay, so next up are mid-grade boards. Currently I'm paying $1.30 a kilo. Our mid-grade boards are pretty much all your green boards that I don't grade as high grade, which we'll get to that next. So pretty much everything, things from say LCD TVs, plasma TVs, printers, You know, like that's from a television. Okay, we've got, you know, like there's a BGA chip, but it's not a higher grade because all of this rubbish, you know, it's almost, see this steel, it's almost a power board, you know, so, but we can get away with mid-grade board here. You know, another kind of television video kind of board, even though it's got a gold corner chip, it's still just a mid-grade board. It's similar to a motherboard. Sometimes I do get people trying to put these into motherboards. As you can see, you got transformers here, all these, the video jack, this whole unit. So it's not a motherboard, it's just a mid-grade board. Especially with the transformers, you're starting to get close to power board. I'll give you an example of what's really close as a power board, because whilst you can't feel it, it's very heavy, and it's all from these relays and all this stuff over this side. There's only one chip on it, and so therefore that's very close to power board. But you know, I do buy these as mid-grade boards. In America, they call a lot of these, what we call mid-grade boards, peripheral boards. And yeah, that's basically kind of what they are. But just because if they're not motherboards or something like that, they don't all go as peripheral boards, because there is a higher grade, and I'll show you those next. But anyway, mid-grade boards, finger strip boards from LCD TVs, these are just mid-grade, all this sort of stuff. From larger TVs, obviously you got these kind of things. Now, because it's got, you know, a little bit of gold plating here, that doesn't really render it any higher. We don't go by gold plating, so, you know, in this case, this will go as a mid-grade board because it's got IC chips. Sometimes they only have copper coils, transformers. In that case, that's just a power board. But what you can do, you can remove these if you want the gold foil bits, and still sell it as a mid-grade to me. Another form of mid-grade board is these riser cards. These are the more modern ones with the new style pins. Still got a bit of old school riser there. So that's just a mid-grade. We don't have a separate grading for riser boards here in Australia. Another example, so you got all these, you know, very nice gold pins. If you remove these gold pins, they would be what I class high-grade gold pins. We'll get to them later. But on the board, it's just a riser board, and so therefore it's just mid-grade here. And if you see the thickness of the board, it's about, you know, 1/3 of an inch thick. So most of the weight is in the board itself on a lot of these. If you just remove the pins, there's no value at all. So that's why we don't have a riser card grade here. It's just goes as mid-grade. Other examples, more pins. So what I suggest, if you think that the gold pins are worth more than what we buy them for, then go for the gold pins yourself. Even if you depopulated the gold pins completely and then you sold me the gold pins, you might do better. But as on the board, mid-grade. Another example, really huge ones. So really nice gold pins on this side. The other side, they're not gold plated and they're still quite big pins. A thick board, about 1/4 of an inch. A bit of junk. So, you know, that's why it's mid-grade. Again, even bigger. This is, again, quite nice gold pins. These are the double layer ones, so there is a plate and a pin, a plate and a pin. But again, 1/3 of an inch thick, blank, very, very heavy. So that's why we only grade it as mid-grade. Then you've got the very common riser boards at the moment, like these. So same thing, all go in the same thing. DVD boards, We don't have a separate grade for DVD boards. We just grade these as mid-grade boards. Okay, now again, these old ones, you can see that side's pretty much blank. A few chips there. As with all the boards that I buy, if you feel that they are worth more, because say you want these gold pins and you think that they're worth more because of the gold pins, well, what I always suggest is just depopulate them yourself completely, and then you've got everything of value, and then and we're done with it. But otherwise, DVD, CD boards go as mid-grade. More examples of mid-grade. So as you can see, there's really not much on it. A couple of chips, but it hasn't got the dead weight of a power board or anything like that. Single site. So pretty much all the green boards, if it's got nothing, then it's a low grade, but pretty much they all fall under mid-grade category unless they're high grade. Couple funny ones. This one here looks like a nice looking board. You can see that gold plating and all that, and this is your classic example of gold plated boards where new scrappers will come in and they'll get a board like this and they'll say, wow, look at all that gold, this board must be worth a lot of money. Well, we know that this is not plating, it's flashing, so it's ENIG. It's a completely different gold, but it still is gold. But a board buyer doesn't look at a board and sees the gold and say, oh, this is X grade, because we're just looking at what's actually on the board itself. And well, use couple of tiny little IC chips, so there's really nothing there. So nothing there that suggests it's a high grade. It's just a mid-grade board, or if you like, a peripheral board. Same deal here. We've got a couple of main chips here. So that's the memory chip, your main processor chip there. Gold flashing, other side. So again, I get boards like this. I get people come with boards, or they'll contact me first saying, oh look, I've got gold boards. Yeah, well, this is usually the gold that they're talking about. When we're talking about gold on boards, it's the gold on the actual chip. So gold capped IC chips or CPUs, that's the kind of gold that we're really looking for on boards, not so much this gold plating. Sure, it has value, and some people just prefer to depopulate everything off this board, keep all the little nice valuable bits, even the little pins, and then keep these board blanks for processing, along with cell phone boards, laptop track boards, all that kind of stuff with a bit of gold plating. I suggest, just bag it all up and keep it. If you can crush it, even better. Put it through a shredder and shred it all down into and bag it up. You'll get some gold recovery out of that. But yeah, on a board, that's just mid-grade. I will show you higher grade, but in this case, it's just mid. Another one that's very close to power board. It's aluminium heatsink here. This is a bit of steel, but it has got a few IC chips. It's, in most buyers would probably just grade this as power board, but I let this get away with mid-grade. So it balances out, Sometimes, like here, you've got a better chip, but overall it's just a mid-grade peripheral board. So it just balances out. Sometimes boards are a little bit better grade than mid-grade. Sometimes they're a little bit worse than mid-grade. So there is millions of different boards, so I can't be sitting there picking through every one of your boards. When you bring me a box like this of mid-grade, it will just get weighed as mid-grade. If you think that there is a higher grade board, you should always keep them separate, because when I'm weighing, I don't really want to pick through and spend that time just doing your sorting, Again, mid-grade. So even though the aluminium, it's worth less, you don't have to take off this aluminium when it's just like that. You can just leave it all on, and it's just a mid-grade board. Again, from either a printer or a TV, something like that. It's actually quite low grade. It's just a low grade chip. We've got a couple of decent BGAs here, the memory, but you know, quite low. So this is where it balances out. You get still get the same price for this as you do for this, and it balances out. All right, so that's pretty much mid-grade boards, and $1.30 a kilo currently paying. So all right, let's move on to high-grade boards. So next we've got high-grade boards, $2 a kilo. Now high grade, what I mean by high grade, it's not super high grade. This is just boards that are better than, say, this mid-grade board. Even though it's got a good, reasonably good chip on it, this is a mid-grade. So the next step up is boards that just better than mid-grade. It's a bit of a new grade for me, so it's pays a bit more than mid-grade. And if you can separate your boards, your high-grade boards, yeah, you'll get a bit more for them. If it's all mixed, it's going, unless there's a large population of high-grade boards in with your mid-grades, I'm not going to sort it. So, but I will go through your high-grade boards if you bring a box, and you know, just to make sure that they are high-grade. They're either one of two things. They're either better than mid-grade or downgraded from a higher grade. And probably a really good example here is this telecom type board. It's from a router or a switch, so it's one of the bigger ones, the 48 ports. So all this is all dead weight and power board weight, you know. I actually probably bought this for, paid more than I probably should have, but yeah, in general, this, if it was better populated, this would go close to a telecom grade board, okay, because it's sort of a telecommunication board, but not everything telecom goes as telecom grade, and this is one of those cases where it's just got too much dead weight and it's a huge board compared to what we've got of value here. You know, I probably paid server grade for this, or telecom grade for this actually, only because normally up along here you've got those really big black boxes and they add even more weight, so it hasn't got any of them, and it also has all these BGA chips running along it. So you know, these are the higher value BGA chips. These ones are not, so they're class 1, class 2, and these are class 3. A lot lower in value because it's just mostly either copper or aluminium. So yeah, so in this case, this was what could have been a telecom grade, but it's been downgraded into a high grade. So at least we're getting still better value than a mid-grade board. But yeah, compared to the weight, there's really not much value. That's an extreme, and everything else is just better than mid-grade. So let's go. So for instance here, again, don't get excited about any gold plating that you see. It's not something we're looking at. They're those black boxes that I was talking about. Usually they've got pulse on them. I always forget what they are, but there's nothing in there. There's just copper and stuff. So that's like a transformer by weight, you know, and so it's dead weight. This is all dead weight. You've got some pins in here, but it's mostly dead weight. So it's not going to go as a telecom kind of board, even though it is some kind of telecommunications board in a server or a network thing. But yeah, it's not high enough value to be a telecom grade board. So, but it's better than mid-grade, blank. So because it is better than mid-grade, it's got a few pretty good chips on it. I call that high grade. Okay, another variation, same kind of thing, same connectors. Okay, this one's probably a little bit better because it doesn't have these pulse things, but still there's just not enough on this board to render it a telecom board. So this I would throw into high grade. Another deal, this one, well, this is only really a mid-grade board in every case. It's just from a printer and very, very common. It has got one good chip on it. But the only reason why I call this a high grade board is because they've left the fingers on. Okay, it's kind of like a slot card, but it's not going to go as a slot card. So if you leave the fingers on, I'll upgrade it to a high grade. If you can also take those fingers off, I won't even notice it. Then this would be down to a mid grade. Okay, so the only reason in this case it's a high grade is because they've left the fingers on, but most people would probably take those fingers off. Another example of a high grade, as you can see, on a low grade, on a mid grade, we've got a lot of junk, aluminium, copper, and all that sort of stuff. So if it doesn't have that sort of much of that junk, then yeah, it's a high grade. So this is all just BGA chips, and even the other side. So, I'm not going to pay mid-grade for something like that. Or in the States, it might be peripheral board. This is better than mid-grade or peripheral board. So, same kind of deal here. It's really got no rubbish. It's just got IC chips. That's all you see. There's no big steel brackets or anything. Other side, we've even got a few. You can see Nortel, so it was from Northern Telecom. So it's a telecommunications kind of board, but it's not a telecom board. But it's better than mid-grade, so it's high grade. $2 a kilo. Other examples, like these little boards, they're probably worth even more, actually. Well, this one is because it's got those nice long BGAs, class 1s, and a few flat packs. So, but it balances out, just like with mid-grade. Some mid-grade, some that I grade as high grade, might be even better than high grade, but we can't go through every single board, as you imagine. Like, you bring 300 boards, I'm not going to go and look at every board and say, oh, this is that grade, that grade. That's up to you to sort out. And another example, it's just IC chips, no real rubbish. We've got some gold pins here, nothing special, but it's mainly because of the IC chips and nothing else. It's high grade. These Promise Technology boards, these are actually very, very valuable. To buy, these can cost thousands of dollars. This one probably cost $4,000 to buy brand new. It's not a slot card. It's just a plugs. But yeah, it's obviously better than mid grade. It's probably better than high grade, this one. But yeah, it really depends. If you've got a few of these, I'd probably throw this into a little bit higher. Just depends on how many you've got, and if we don't have to sort through, pick them out or anything. But yeah, that's just another example of high grade. Another high grade, so you can see we've got gold corner chips, tantalums, not much rubbish. You can leave this kind of thing on, it's not so much. It has got a transformer, so that brings it down, but still high grade. Another one, T-Con boards from LCD TVs. Very common these days. Everyone's scrapping LCD TVs, and it's just that top T-Con board. They will go as high grade. Usually got a nice BGA on there. 2 plugs. Another example. Because it's got no rubbish, it's a high grade. It's got chips on this side. It's also got chips on that side. As you can see, it's Nortel. So it was some kind of telecom, come out of a telecom system. But in this case, it's a high grade. This one here, again, it's close to just a low mid grade, and it actually is a mid grade. I just wanted to show that if you want to try and get high grade from me, you have to at least take off these aluminium heat sinks. Okay, so you got to pop them off, and hopefully without removing the actual chips, and that I will give you a high grade for that. If the heat sinks are on, I can't see the chips, and it's just lowers the value again. So this is yeah, I'll give you a high grade for that. All right, real pretty boards. Even though there's only, you know, a couple of chips on here, there's not much. It's not a lot of rubbish. We do have copper little transformers and stuff, but it's a higher grade obviously than mid grade. Nothing on this side. We only got gold plating, but yeah, if this had more chips, this would go closer to telecom grade. But it's only got, you know, a couple chips here. Another example that I will pay high grade because it's got so many IC chips and the BGAs. But usually I prefer that you remove this bracket when it comes to high grade. When it's slot cards, that's fine, you can leave them on. But yeah, in the same case with this one, if you this is like from a modem. If you want to get high grade from me, I'll pay high grade for this, but you've got to remove this heatsink, okay? And so I can see the chip underneath, and then most likely I'll pass this as high grade board. Okay, if the chip's on, I'll just throw this back into mid grade. Another example of a mid grade that I pay high grade, has got rubbish, but on the other side, as you can see, it's well populated. It's got a lot of IC chips. So for the little space, we've got a lot of good value stuff. So therefore, we've got to pay a little bit more. In this case, it's it's from like a printer or something. It's got the CCD sensor. In this case, I accept it like that, but normally I prefer you remove all the wires and all the cables. So that's it. You know, another little board. Just some tantalums under there, but yeah, because it's only not much board, but a lot of chips, we send that into high grade at least. Sometimes you might throw in stuff that is a little bit higher than high grade, or a lot higher, and I'll put it up to motherboard grade, server grade, or even telecom grade. It just depends, and how many you got. All right, so that was high grade. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so the next one we've got the standard PC motherboard, $3 a kilo. PC motherboards don't really need much introduction. Obviously can be PC or can be from Apple's. No problem there. Basically, yeah, it speaks for itself. General motherboards from PCs. Obviously, the main thing that all I really need you to do here is remove the battery, and obviously the heatsink and the heatsink bracket. So you can see there's 4 holes here where there was a steel or plastic bracket holding the heatsink. Don't get confused with having to remove this socket, metal socket. That stays on. That's fine. This heatsink here, unless it's a really giant one, you can leave this heatsink on as well. As long as you got your battery removed and not the bracket for the CPU, but the bracket for the heatsink that goes into these 4 holes, and usually there's a steel plate underneath, or it could be actually just plastic. You have to remove that and the battery. The rest can stay on. Heatsink's on. Other examples. So I don't pay any less or any more for small socket CPUs. These are the large socket CPUs, so technically these kind of have the higher value, and these have a lower value, and then these coloured boards with the metal sockets are lower again. But we don't do that here in Australia. We just buy all motherboards under one grade, or all PC type motherboards under one grade. Another example of a motherboard, in this case, tiny little strip of gold fingers. That doesn't make it worth any more, but you know, some people will take off these gold fingers. You won't notice it anyway. So if you take off these gold fingers, I won't notice it, but at the same time, it's still a motherboard, so it's not really going to devalue it. As far as depopulating anything off a motherboard, well, look, this is less standard. Let's go for, you know, say a basic common coloured motherboard. There is really not much you can depopulate from a board without it turning into something else. So like under this heatsink here, if I can get one, there'll be a BGA chip or something like that. Now, say if this board here, if I remove this BGA chip, it's really no longer a motherboard. You know, it still is a motherboard, but it's not what, when we advertise to buy motherboards, this is how we expect the motherboard to be, as it is out of the factory, with the battery removed and the bracket removed. That's all we ask. Once you start if you remove this main chip, you've almost turned this into a mid-grade board. So about half the value. So what I suggest, if you're going to depopulate motherboards, there's not much you can actually pick off unless you depopulate the whole lot. And you know, I don't depopulate many motherboards. I prefer to sell these because there's just not much compared to what you're getting paid for the motherboard as it is. But some people don't have buyers, so they prefer to depopulate. It's up to them. So that was a good example of having heat sinks staying on motherboards, the brackets removed. You can leave this metal bracket on. This little heat sink here, that's fine. Here, we're almost there. We've got the plastic bracket. So they're just clipped into the board. And look, if there's a few of these plastic brackets, they don't really matter because they don't really weigh much, you know. If you can be bothered, you can pop these off. Like if you had like 100 motherboards and they all had the plastic, prefer that you took off at least half of them. But the plastic ones don't really matter much. It's when they're metal, and if I can just find sample. So again, in this case, it's ready to go on this side. You can't see the metal bracket, but there actually is this bracket on the base. Now this is very common where people will remove the heat sink and all that from the top, and you know, they don't look for that metal bracket. That's part of the heat sink bracket, and it's steel. It's got to go. Sometimes there might be one or two you might have forgot. I mean, I'm not going to downgrade boards if you left a couple on, but overall you really have to take this steel off. You know, we're paying $3 a kilo for motherboards. This steel is worth 10 cents a kilo. And yeah, most board buyers just won't accept that. So that's all I really ask you to do. So remove that plastic bracket from the back, from the top, and remove the battery. All else can stay. That can stay. This little heat sink can stay. Perfect. All right. So that's PC motherboards. Come in all kinds of variations. Nice old school ones. $3 a kilo. Oh, I just wanted to mention one more thing. With the heat sinks on PC motherboards, now here you can see the battery's still here. Got to remove that. But with this particular heat sink, it's actually got a fan on top. When it's got a fan, you've got to remove it because the fan is obviously, you know, copper bearing. It's not aluminium, so it's downgrading a lot. So, and the steel screws. So you've got to remove just the fan. You can still leave the heatsink on. So if you can do that, it'd be much appreciated. Obviously, again, if there's one or two boards, I'd probably just tell you about it. But if there's too much, then I'll probably end up giving you my screwdriver and you can take them all off. So now we've removed this fan, and you can just scrap that out yourself. And we've still left the aluminium heatsink. That's fine, no problem. All I have to do now is just pop that battery out. We don't want that. No bracket. It's ready to go. That is how we accept motherboards. Alright, next up we have server boards. $4 a kilo. Most server boards speak for themselves, a bit like PC motherboards, but are also a little bit like high grade, where we upgrade some boards up to server grade even though they're not server, and we downgrade some telecom type boards down to server grade if they're not so much telecom. So, but your standard, that's what we call a server motherboard, I guess. You know, you got usually dual CPU sockets. So if you scrap out a server and it only has one socket, but it might be a little bit bigger motherboard than, say, a standard PC motherboard, but if it's only got one socket, we grade them, they're just motherboards. So it's only when they've got 2 sockets and above. Sometimes they'll have 4 sockets. Sometimes you'll get boards with 8 or 16 sockets. Sometimes it's all sockets. But that's what we're talking about when we're really referring to server board grade. It's a dual socket motherboard. And so that's your standard dual socket server motherboard. Just another example. Very, very similar. 2 different sockets. The same deal as with motherboards. You want to remove the battery and any heatsink brackets. And sometimes the heatsink brackets can be clipped in and quite big on servers. If I can find one. It's another server board with the small sockets. Not a great deal on it. You can leave things like this, little heatsink, no problem. Other side it's just blank. So really this is a very low value for a server board because we only got a little population of chips here, even though they're good quality. Really not much else anywhere else. Probably under there, but another variation, dual socket, server, no problem. Smaller version, almost PC size, dual socket, it's a server board. Same again, the older school with the Pentium 3 socket style. And again, same deal. There's 2 of them, it's a dual socket. If there was only one, it's most likely just a PC motherboard. Again, and this is what I wanted to show just for the brackets. Okay, so everything up here is acceptable. Aluminium heat sinks, all of these heat sinks are fine to leave on, even though they're only $1 a kilo and we're paying $4 a kilo for the board. You can leave them on, you can leave these parts on as long as the brackets are off. And I can see that these have got brackets underneath. See these little pieces of metal or steel? Sometimes that could be stainless steel, it doesn't matter. Very easy to take off. They don't weigh a great deal. Oh, these ones don't. Sometimes they can, but yeah, having these on too many boards is not really acceptable by buyers' standards. They really expect you. They understand when you forget a few boards, you got 1 or 2 in the pile. But if it's obvious that you haven't removed the brackets, then you leave the buyer no choice but to drop down the value by 10% or whatever they feel. Okay, so that's your standard server boards. Other boards that I grade as server boards are pretty much like telecom type boards, but they're just not good enough for telecom. So as you can see here, it's actually a very pretty board. This, you got beautiful little gold fingers here, and they're good quality ones. Even if you took these gold fingers off, to be honest, it would still be a server grade board. So it's, you know, Goldfinger, it's not going to make this a slot card or anything. But yeah, because if you really look at it carefully, you'll notice that there's, you know, if it was telecom, it would be heavily populated with IC chips and stuff. But looking at this, we've got a lot of copper coils and transformers and stuff, but there's really not much as far as chips. These two aren't really very valuable as far as scrap. That's just copper tops and not much of a BGA underneath. These two chips are the best value chips on the board, and that little one and that one. But so there's no real IC chips or anything. We've got copper. So what could have been a telecom grade if it was more of this, it's downgraded to a server grade. So it's only $1 a kilo less. So it's not a lot less, but it's just not going to be good enough to get any more than server grade. Exactly the same example or idea. It's just it's actually the exact same board. And as you can see, this board here, the only difference is the tantalum capacitors are yellow. Right? And on this one, the tantalum capacitors are black. So they're exactly the same boards. Right? So both servers. Another kind of telecom board that's been downgraded to server grade, and even that's reasonably generous for some of these. These would have had gold fingers. If the gold fingers were still on there, you probably would have gotten server board grade for them, because they're technically, telecom grade, because they're technically like a telecom board, but all this stuff is not worth telecom grade. But even so, if it had the fingers on this, we'd probably get away with telecom. But in this case, it's just server grade. Okay, so it's still not bad value, considering there's not much on this one. So that's pretty much exactly the same. It's another variation. See, if it had more IC chips, it would be telecom grade. But because it's, you know, only a few IC chips scattered around, the rest of all this is low recovery. There's it's base metal stuff. So, but still managed to squeeze this one into server grade. That's almost about it. This one here, again, another one that was very close to, let me just see if I can see the camera. Yeah, very close to telecom grade. It's so close, it's got a lot of chips and stuff, but it does have some junk. You know, it does have copper transformers, this big sort of power module here. So it does have some junk. So this is very close between server and telecom. In this case, I graded this as server, mostly probably because of the blank back. So we're getting, you know, very close to higher grade. Here again is another, you know, almost exact example of what is really a telecom grade, but there were certain things that downgraded it to a server grade. Okay, and in this case, it's this big, heavy bracket on the outside. We don't accept brackets like this on these kind of boards. They're not slot cards. Slot cards, it's a different thing. But this bracket wasn't removed, and reason is because you got little nut screws here. It would have been a real pain in the neck to remove this, but it's actually a heavy piece of steel, and it makes the board on this side very, very heavy. And so therefore that got downgraded from telecom down to what we got here, a server grade. So even though it has got some good stuff, it's vintage. These square things, these are vintage tantalum capacitors, and they're kind of like IBM style. They come in all sorts of thicknesses and stuff. These are boards from probably about the 70s or something like that. And then we've got some router boards. Might have come out of a Cisco router or something like that. You know, very close to telecom, but just not good enough for telecom. So it goes as a server grade. Okay, blank back, not very much chips, but still is a light board and reasonably heavy, you know, higher grade than you know, say a high grade. It's yeah, sorry I lost it on this one, but yeah, if you can remove these plastic parts, great. But if you only got one or two and you didn't think of it, that's fine. But that's another kind of server board. But overall, most server motherboards that we're talking about looks like that. All right, so server motherboards, $4 a kilo. So next up is laptop motherboards. Just like server boards, $4 a kilo. And once again, laptop motherboards basically speak for themselves. Sometimes you might get small tablet kind of contraptions that will have little boards very similar, and so if they look kind of like that, they've got little RAM slot, usually, you know, CPU and some nice chips. No rubbish, it's basically a laptop, or just straight out of a laptop. All kinds. And the same deal, we need to remove the battery. So you've got to look for the battery. It's got to be somewhere on the board. And also, like I can see here, everything kind of looks fine here. But on the back here, see, we've left that little bracket on. And so, especially on things like laptop boards, you've got to remove that steel bracket from both sides. So you got the heatsink mounting up here somewhere. It might be just a copper heatsink, but you got to remove that bit of bracket underneath. Okay, it's kind of all we really ask when it comes to laptop motherboards. So again, everything's fine here. They've taken out the battery. There's no heat sinks or fans or anything. You can leave this part on, that's fine. But you've got to remove this heatsink bracket from both sides. Sometimes they're a little bit harder. But they're just popped in, and that's just steel. You know, it's very low, just really drops down the value of your board. So if you can do that, you're always going to ensure that you're getting top dollar. There's going to be no deductions once again. So it's a very common thing. It's a very easy thing to pull out. Sometimes they're barely even sitting in there. But obviously people are, you know, they're trying to maximize their value. But, you know, it's just kind of taking advantage of your buyer. And, you know, and your buyer is probably, you know, just more concerned about when they sell their boards that their buyer isn't going to downgrade, because it's a lot easier to downgrade 20 kilos of boards than it is to send in 2 tons of boards and have the whole lot downgraded because you know, just not picking up metal brackets and batteries. And on laptops, they can be very, very small little round batteries, and so you've really got to look for them. But anyway, okay, so that was laptop motherboards, $4 a kilo. Okay, let's get on to telecom boards.